Welcome everyone. We're excited to have my friend Pam on the show. She's badass. I shouldn't say that just in case it goes out to some places that your discretion is advised.
Yes.
No, but you are though, and every time we talk, I for sure learn something, and I just you're a true champion for our lands, waters, and people. And you're very articulate with your doctorate in law and your law degree and multiple degrees, and but and more importantly, you're just one of the peeps, and you do so many great things. But before we jump to you, my good friend, we're just going to give you some updates on what's going over here on the West Coast and maybe possibly some other places around Turtle Island here. And I'm going to introduce Christine, of course. She's part of our team here. That's give a wave, give a hello.
Hello, hi.
She's going to be helping us out and helping with the questions and doing the tech side of it. And we have Peter, who's going to give update today on the Trans Mountain and what's going on and what we could do and how we could save the world. He has life's answers right now. Peter, to you.
No pressure, Ruben. Wow. Yeah, happy to be here and lots to talk about on the Trans Mountain front. We had a pretty significant little victory this week. So I wanted to give an update on where we're at with the hummingbirds. For the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about these hummingbird nests that were found in the path of Trans Mountain. And now we've confirmed that Environment Canada has stopped all logging in that area of Burnaby until August 20th. And so what that means is, yeah, amazing. And so much like love and gratitude to the community nest finding network who've been out there and just like, they're the only reasons that we found out that Trans Mountain was destroying these hummingbirds' nests through their logging, and they just happened to have Environment Canada out with them, and Trans Mountain destroyed a hummingbird nest right in front of them. So yeah, just so much love. It's such amazing work. And so what that means is, because this area is a priority area for Trans Mountain, if they can't get the clearing done this summer, it will probably push the clearing into next year. That is, unless we stop the pipeline and before then. But what it does is it actually pushes back their in-service date that they planned. So that adds costs, it adds delays, and every single day that this pipeline is delayed, the more the business case just falls apart for it, and the more Trudeau just looks like a fool for continuing to spend taxpayer money on a project that's just useless. So that's very exciting, and I think of that little hummingbird story. I think we've all heard the tale of the forest fire and the hummingbirds flying over, bringing just a little bit of water at a time, putting out the big fire, and doing what he can. And so I think we should all take inspiration from that. Could be Judy Wilson mentioned that in the press conference yesterday, and I just think that's such a beautiful moment. Other news, we're looking on insurance this week. We talked about the insurance campaign last week and how the pipeline company is asking the Canada Energy Regulator to hide the companies that are insuring it, because campaigners have actually been really effective in preventing and driving up costs for Trans Mountain to get insurance. So we're expecting later this week, the deadline for them to file is on Friday. And so we may get another full list of insurance companies that campaigners can target, because the Canada Energy Regulator hasn't made its decision yet. So that's really exciting, and keep an eye out for that. Basically Trans Mountain has said that this is a very effective way to drive up costs for them and prevent their pipeline from getting built, because if you don't have insurance, you can't run oil through it. Other big pieces of news I wanted to mention, sort of broader news. Canada has a new climate target as of last week. It's not that much of an improvement on, before this, we said we'd cut 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. And now the government has come forward under massive pressure from President Joe Biden and other leaders around the world. And they've come forward with a 40% cut. It's still much less than what the US, the EU, or the UK are doing. But even that extra little bit just makes this pipeline make less sense. The existing climate target that we had already meant that production couldn't continue rising to fill this pipeline. And now that it's down to 40%, there's really no way that they can make the math of this all add up. So the last piece I wanted to talk about, which is just filled my heart today, was the union for most of the oil and gas workers in Canada, Unifor, actually came out and said, we don't think 40% is good enough. We think we should be cutting 60%. And in order to do that, we need a just transition for our members. And so, this is, to my knowledge anyway, I think the first time that the union representing the workers in the tar sands, the workers on these fracking rigs, is saying, we need to be doing more. We need to be cutting more of our carbon pollution, and we need to help our members actually get through it because they can see the writing on the wall. So that was really exciting to me. I love, labor, environmental solidarity is a beautiful thing. So that's all I had for sort of the news on that front. Ruben, did you have anything you wanted to mention?
No, I remember, I don't know if you remember, this is maybe 8 or 9 years ago, Unifor, which is the biggest union in Alberta tar sands, they said they made a statement that they wanted green energy jobs, and I don't have to remind people, and you look at Enbridge pulling out of the Alberta tar sands in a way that they're selling a lot of their assets. And then, like I mentioned last week, their investment portfolio was 60% into fossil fuels and 5% into green energy, and those things flipped. So everything's changing, and people are seeing the writing on the wall. Even some of the bigger companies there, and Trudeau's still pushing this forward. And so, yeah, I'd thank you for that. But the hummingbird story is pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Like Kaya was, my daughter, she did the opening for the press conference yesterday, and she's explaining what a hummingbird is. And it's a messenger, but also a messenger of the future. And she goes, the writing's on the wall for the future of this pipeline, this hummingbird showing us. So she had a good quote in saying that. And yeah, really proud of the people and the allies. And I think to stop something like this and talking to all our viewers out there, it takes everybody. It takes everybody. And there's people up in trees up there, in Burnaby Mountain and stopping construction. And there's some of the people that I believe saw as well as a whole bunch of other people up there that saw these nests and reported them. And correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, maybe you could know the story better, that they actually, the person that was the witness to it and was reporting this, they cut the trees right in front of them. And then
that's right.
Yeah, so it was crazy, but I'm happy to see that this is happening, and it'd be good to see some of our allies all along the pipeline push these initiatives and protect our salmon. And this is the way, because we know very well when they get fined, they don't care. Fined $500,000, they don't care. They keep trudging through, and so, yeah, thanks for the update. Anything else, Peter, or any questions, Christine?
I have no questions, but I could give a quick intro.
Peter, one more sec.
That's all I had.
Okay, thanks, Peter. That's badass. I think tides are turning again, after a long drought of not being able to do normally what we do and some of the work that we do with COVID. Now we're able to, and of course Charlene's here, and that's my sister. Give a wave. She's part of the insurance too, where she's gone to Europe and got some of the bigger insurance agencies and banks to divest. So give a shout out to my sister there, and the rest of my spiritual family. They're just tagging in to be part of our live audience on Zoom. And of course, this is being broadcasted out to sacredecology.com. So Christine, back to you.
Well, thanks, Ruben. Yeah, Sacred Ecology is a documentary film project, production company, and online publication about the importance of cultural and biodiversity preservation. We believe that preserving traditional cultures, Indigenous rights, sacred sites, and practicing regenerative organic agriculture is essential for the biodiversity preservation of plant and animal species, and ultimately for sustaining all life on Earth. I have joined teams with Ruben George, my good friend, to host his live stream series called Truth, Family, Culture, and Health, which is the foundation of Coast Salish law. Ruben George is the Sacred Trust Manager of Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. He's an environmental activist, spiritual leader, Sundance chief, and grandson of Chief Dan George. He has spent the last decade educating his neighbors in Coast Salish territory about environmental issues and leading the fight against the Trans Mountain Pipeline in Canada. Today, our special guest is Pam Palmater. Am I saying that right, Pam? Welcome. Dr. Pamela Palmater is an Indigenous lawyer, professor, author, and social justice activist from Eel River Bar First Nation in New Brunswick, Canada. She has 4 university degrees, including a BA in Native Studies, an LLB, a master's and doctorate in law, specializing in Indigenous law. A practicing lawyer for 22 years, Pam has been volunteering and working in First Nation issues for over 30 years on a wide range of issues like socio-economic conditions, Aboriginal and treaty rights, and legislation. We're really happy to have you here, Pamela. Back to you, Ruben.
30 years. She's been doing this since she's 5 years old.
Yes.
Yes.
5 years. I swear, 5 years old.
You look so young. And you've done so much, and it's awesome to have you on our show. You know, and I was happy to hear you speak and teach us, and I've been watching some of your TikTok. Those are really fun. I enjoy those, like little bit of dancing, little bit of move. You know, you have to teach us how you put the quotes above you and you point at them, and
Yeah.
but it's and really all that aside, I appreciate what you do for our land, our water, our people, our murdered missing women. You know, there's so much that you're involved in, and as it is, like with our Indigenous communities, we wear multiple hats and we do multiple things, and so, you know, I know you do that. So it's much more than what we see and what you're doing, and when you're involved with your community, and that's why I seen maybe you could explain this to us, that you have your education is diverse to a little bit, but impressive. But I wonder, what was the driving force? Maybe we could start with that for you, and the passion that you have and the spirit that you have to work on all these things and talk about our land, water, and people rights. What got you going on that? What was the thing that really pushed you forward? And as well as introduce yourself too.
Thanks, Ruben. Kwe Nindalwizi Pam Palmater. I'm from the sovereign Mi'kmaq Nation and unceded Mi'kmaqi territory. My home reserve is Ugbaganjig, or Eel River Bar First Nation. And it's an honor to be here because I love doing events with you, Ruben, because we could just talk for hours about all of these issues. Yeah. And the last event that we did, it's so funny because we were guest speakers on a panel, but it ended up, Ruben and I were talking about strategy and how to, you know, do X, Y, and Z and advance the issues. And we kind of forgot about the whole panel. It was all just strategy. So I'm obviously honored to be here, and you know, your work is incredible. To your question, what got me started? Oh my gosh, I have a ginormous family, like many Native people do. I have 8 sisters and 3 brothers, and most of them are older than me, and they were all activists. So when I was a little girl, they were taking me to protests, to community meetings, to government negotiations, to stuff that when I was little, I thought was kind of boring and I didn't understand what was going on, and you know, I'd rather be playing with my, you know, dolls or something. But that's what really ingrained it in me, because it just becomes a part of you. I didn't understand, like, why are people yelling? Why are they screaming? Why are some of the women crying? Why is it so emotional? And I really couldn't understand that until over time I could, you know, once you start understanding what the issues were, then I could see this stuff really matters, you know. And for some people, they're like a part-time volunteer, you know, at a soup kitchen, you know, 3 hours a week or something. But my family always taught me that I didn't even have the right to call myself a Mi'kmaq person or claim to be part of the Mi'kmaq Nation unless what I was doing was contributing to the nation, not asking what the nation was doing for me, but what I was contributing. And so they kind of ingrained this idea that no matter what it is you're doing, a doctor, a nurse, a lawyer, you know, a land defender, a water protector, everything that you're doing has to have at its core protecting the people, the plants, the animals, and everything in your territory as your nation, as well as not forgetting all of our, you know, internation relatives and all of the people with whom we have native treaties or native confederacies. And so it was really, you can just blame everything on them. I mean, every kitchen table conversation, every time we saw each other, it was just a massive bunch of us talking and being emotional and yelling and crying, and how are we going to fix this, and how are we going to stop them from, you know, imprisoning our hunters, and how do we advocate for our women. And so it's just, it's life. It just becomes your life. It's an inherent part of your identity. And so that's really where it comes from. And I always tell people, I don't say anything original. Everything that's planted in my head comes from my aunties, my uncles, my brothers, my sisters, my family, elders that I've ever talked to, everyone I've met all over Turtle Island, because we've all just been born into this, you know, and in order for us to protect our peoples in the future, we just have to keep doing this, and we have to keep adapting and finding ways to adjust and change and respond, because government learns quickly and then responds to what we're doing. So we always kind of have to be a step ahead. And so that's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah, I was talking to one of our elders here, and just to end what you just the end part of what you said was made me think of this is, he said, it feels like there's a set standard that Canada goes by dealing with each nation right across our country. And now I look at, you know, UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights, that I called it as soon as they came out and said they're going to sign and do something, that would be a mechanism that they would use to continue to do what they do. And that's a big problem, because I know in your scope of work that you do with murdered missing women, I seen how they dealt with, essentially how they dealt with the pipelines. It's the same way. Mm-hmm. And how they deal with everything else, social services, how there's more children in care than ever. What's your comment on that?
On
how they deal with us, and dealing with the government, and dealing with how they deal with how they, you mentioned it a little bit of
yeah,
how it's always a battle, always, and it doesn't have to be.
And part of the problem is, like, historically, their most effective means was dividing us from our strength, which is our collective, right? Our collective and our culture. Because when you're grounded in your culture, literally you're immovable. You are an immovable force. And similarly, if you are surrounded by your collective, you know, whether it be a clan, a village, a house, you know, your nation, you are also protected. It's when they can get you as individuals, pick you off as individuals, or separate you from how you are grounded, so that the space that's in your head is occupied by colonizer ideas instead of our ideas. And that's why decolonization is so important. And the other aspect of that, you know, the way in which they've been able to be effective against us is in each battle that they fight with our nations. We don't know the terms on which they're fighting that battle. We don't know the results of things that have happened. We don't know, you know, what they're negotiating in this agreement versus what they're doing over here. We don't know what Fisheries and Oceans is doing on the West Coast, and whether or not that's applying on the East Coast. And so traditionally or historically, they've had that advantage of no information, right? Because it took a long time for us to get information to one another. Nowadays, we have cell phones and social media, and we know things that are happening before they do. And so it's much easier now when we're, say, dealing with Fisheries and Oceans, like a super enforcement, racist, colonized corporate entity that it is so far away from a conservative or a conservation kind of mode. This is really about protecting the industries. Now I can literally just call you up, Ruben, and say, hey, here's the problem we're having on the East Coast around enforcement, around, you know, this moderate livelihood, around Section 35, any of these things. What are you doing? What are they arguing over here on this hand? And you will find when you compare notes on, you know, it could be DFO, it could be the RCMP, it could be Justice Canada, that they are doing different things in different places. And our power is really bringing all of that information together because they want us to sign confidential agreements, non-disclosure agreements, keep negotiations private. But when we do that, we disadvantage everybody else. So there's strategic ways around those things that takes their power away, because their power has always been lack of information. And so you have to assume that what they're saying is right, or you have to give them the so-called benefit of the doubt. And I think we always have to assume that they are not acting in our best interests, and we have to act accordingly. So I would say it's really about making sure that, you know, we're not doing this stuff alone, that we're grounded in our cultures, but also we've got the collective behind us, the broader collective, and sharing information on all of these files, because it does matter, even though we have different nations, different territories, different kinds of rights, how they treat us and how they defeat us are the same. And, you know, we've got to respond and stay ahead of them.
Yeah, we talked about this last, but we had a victory here on the West Coast. But what we're talking about is them trying to determine what is how much lobster you could fish.
Yeah.
And then we talked about scientifically, everybody, all the experts in every area said the First Nation lobster fish will not affect anything.
No.
Nothing.
No.
The Nuu Nation, maybe you can look it up, Peter. They just won last week a fishing rights. I believe because they're trying to determine what is sustainable fishing. I mean, not sustainable. How much do we need to eat? And they're trying to determine that for us. And that's what we talked about. But it's a shame, like with all these things, and the Canadian Constitution, Section 35 protects our rights, but we still have to go to court and prove these things and prove them. I mean, prove them. It's ridiculous, but
and over and over. That's the problem, Ruben. Over and over and over and over on the exact same issue. Sparrow, we have a right to fish. Okay, now Vanderpeet has to prove it. Now Gladstone has to prove it. Now, you know, Marshall has to prove it. Oh, and Marshall doesn't just have to prove it once. Now we're going to have to go to court again and prove that, yeah, we still have the same right the Supreme Court of Canada said. And it's a game that they play over and over and over again because they don't want to fully recognize those rights. And here's the problem with Section 35. Native people fought very hard to have Section 35 in there, protection for Aboriginal treaty rights, title, self-government, all of that stuff. However, the government has weaponized it against us. So instead of being this protective mechanism, they use it as a means to drill down and through our rights every single time. If you listen to the arguments they make in all of these Section 35 cases, first of all, they will deny that you have the right altogether. And then the alternative argument, well, even if you do have the right, it was extinguished. And another alternative argument, even if you do have it and it's not extinguished, well, we have a legislative objective to limit it to what we want to do. And it's like every argument they make is consistently denial, 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 denial. And that is not what the spirit of Section 35 is. Section 35 was supposed to be like a shield to protect our rights. And they haven't used it that way. They've weaponized it. And I think we have to understand that and pick and choose which cases we bring and which cases we don't bring and under what context and what we're arguing and what we don't argue, to make sure that whenever we take Canada to court, it's to tear down their laws and their bad policy making decisions and nothing that can hurt our rights, for example, because even when we prove it, we have to do it again. I mean, look at what's happening in Nova Scotia right now. DFO is like, yeah, despite, you know, the Supreme Court of Canada, despite the fact that we said, we'll recognize your rights, we're just going to go back to the same old way of having these lobster seasons. And, you know, Sabaganagity and others have said, no, that's not what's going to happen. We have the inherent sovereign right to enact our own laws, our own governing practices based on Mi'kmaq laws and science based on conservation science, and we put that all together to protect the species and manage the resource, as well as make sure that our people can eat. I mean, if they could, they would deny us every last fish and see us starve for the sake of industry to make money. And that's what we're fighting against.
Can you give more of an update of what's going on right now today?
Yeah. So I think the last time that we spoke, you saw all of the violence that was happening, all of the stuff that was really flashy with the fires and the threats and everything else. And then it kind of died out in the media, but the violence never stopped. So there's still violence against our children out east. There's still violence against adults, threats ongoing. There's still these non-native fishermen, who many of whom identify as Acadian fishermen, are badgering, bullying, harassing, and terrorizing people who engage in fish sales, like the market people. So the middle people who do all the sales. The same with local businesses. Local businesses weren't serving Mi'kmaq people anymore. So you still have a lot of violence and racism, overt racism happening. And then you have the minister or the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, who basically said, determined on their own, without consulting with or getting the consent of all of the Mi'kmaq chiefs in Nova Scotia, that they're just going to go ahead. DFO is going to enforce the seasons, and they're going to make arrests and keep confiscating and pressing charges. And you see now there's a whole host of Mi'kmaq people that are facing court charges who've had their lobster and or equipment confiscated. They're saying they're going to do it again. But Sipekne'katik and other Mi'kmaq fishers are saying, no, we're holding strong. We are not going to give in to the violence, the law enforcement, or any of the intimidation this time. We are going to manage our own fishery. And, that's where it is. It's a very precarious position for our people to be in, knowing that, look at how bad the violence got last time. Look at how easy it is for them to press charges, make us go to court, make us spend money. But the Sipekne'katik community is not taking it laying down. They've filed lawsuits against the government, lawsuits against the people who were engaged in these, really horrific acts of violence. And they're pursuing other means to assert their rights. And that couldn't make me any prouder, because that's a huge burden for these people to bear, knowing that they're walking around the community and they face these threats of violence and they face this racism, and the government, who pretended when it was all in the media that yes, we're going to sit down and yes, we're going to do what's right, they didn't. And we knew they wouldn't. And you see statements from DFO saying nothing's going to change the way that we manage the fisheries. And that just shows you the bad faith on the table. Because if nothing can change the way they do fisheries, it means they can't possibly be respecting our rights. They're not coming to the table in a good way to accommodate or even consider our interests. And so it's poisoned or tainted right from the beginning.
They're so afraid. And I know this, that they're afraid, because when we start talking, like you say, and this is what we talked about, I really like what we were working on, what I told you a little bit with my Uncle Len. We're like all the efforts that we put into that Kinder Morgan, TMX, the assessments, analysis, we do this to a certain degree already with Ministry Children's Service. We have a protocol agreement to them. They can't come on our res without our consent or do any work without us making sure. And to a certain degree, the police, and then education, all that. But we want to do it more within our law. And when we wanted that, we wanted to share it. Yeah. We wanted to share it to because we're all the same law. What you're doing over there is our medicine wheel is the 4 points of Longhouse is truth, family, health, and culture. That's the foundation. Then you add the fundamentals of any religious belief: love or honor, respect, dignity. That's how we try to improve our lives and run our lives and run our communities and protect everything we love: lands, waters, and people. So it just drives me crazy just listening to that, because it's the same crap here. And I know you've been doing really good work around murder and missing women, and that was crazy too. They asked me to MC part of the inquiries here, and I talked to my lawyer friends here, and they're like, you know what? It did good that they listened to the stories, but the inquiry should have been on the police. the judges, the coroners, and all those things. I know you've been working on that. Can you share a little bit?
Yes. So yes to everything that you said. One of the most frustrating things was when we knew that finally they were going to have an inquiry, we didn't wait for them to develop the terms of reference. We got a whole bunch of Indigenous women together from a wide variety of backgrounds, and we sat down, we said, okay, what needs to be in this terms of reference so that we can tell them? And we said, you absolutely must have an independent investigation into all of the individual cases of murdered and missing Indigenous women, including the ones that you consider solved, because we know how they solve things. They don't solve them properly, they don't investigate them. So we wanted an independent review of that, like a forensic review. And then we also wanted an investigation into the police, the ways in which police, any form of law enforcement, so police officers, RCMP, DFO, corrections officials, anyone involved in law enforcement, to be investigated for their role, not just in the failure to protect women or investigate, but in their role as perpetrators. Because my research that I did for the inquiry was all related to police involvement in sexualized violence against Indigenous women and girls on a widespread basis, both when they're in custody, like in prisons, when they're in cop cars, when they're picked up by police officers, and of course in other areas. And so, you know, we definitely wanted this forensic review. We wanted an investigation of the police. And the other thing we wanted them to investigate in detail was the link between the extractive industry and murdered and missing Indigenous women, exploitation, human trafficking, child porn rings, all of those things connected to things like man camps and other development practices that we knew. We had at least basic evidence that these rates were increased wherever there was development, especially around man camps, and the tie with police officers and law enforcement around those things. So we know that from the research, whenever there is a child porn ring sting or a human trafficking sting, there's always cops that are caught up. There's always teachers, there's also social workers, parole officers, corrections officials. So basically everybody who's involved in institutionalizing or oppressing Indigenous women and girls are also the perpetrators in this. And they absolutely refused. They absolutely refused to do that. We know why, that the provinces wouldn't agree to pass orders and councils for these terms of reference if the police were there. And so instead, we had a terms of reference that said, oh yeah, and if you have a problem with the police, you can just go and complain to the police, the same police who threaten your life if you say anything. So to me, those were some like significant gaps that were in the national inquiry that really points the finger at the state. And you know, to me, the primary issue here is state perpetrators, you know, so hospital officials, doctors, nurses who are engaged in all of the forms of genocide against Indigenous women, be it forced sterilizations, forced abortions, sexual assaults. I mean, you name it. I wanted them to look specifically at the state instead of just looking at things like poverty in general as the reason, you know, kind of take the focus off of the women as, you know, being blamed for so-called high-risk lifestyles and put the focus back on the state, because genocide is not a high-risk lifestyle. Genocide is a minefield that is nearly impossible to survive. And to say that all of the ways in which Indigenous women and girls navigate that minefield of genocide could somehow be faulted for that is absolutely incredible, and it turns the tables. So I was very disappointed in that. I still participated in the sense of making a submission jointly with the Feminist Alliance for International Action and Canadians Without Poverty. And we also made like oral and written testimony. And we said they still have to address these things. And you'll note that one of the recommendations that came out of the National Inquiry has got almost zero attention. And that is that the National Inquiry recommended that a separate National Inquiry be held into the relationship between the extractive industry and murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. But you hear nothing, absolutely nothing about that. And I think a lot of things about that, and you know, just to, because we are talking about murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, and now I'm kind of on a rant. The federal government is going to be issuing a pathway document, which is going to be their stated intention that they are someday going to be coming up with a plan to deal with murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Note that we're almost 2 years past the final report of the National Inquiry and 5 years since the start of the National Inquiry. Now remember, Minister Bennett and other ministers at the time said, don't worry, we're not going to wait until the National Inquiry concludes their business before we start taking urgent action on murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Not only did they wait all of that time for the final report, but we're 2 years later and they still haven't acted. We took them back to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and demanded that they do something about genocide on murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And you know what their response was to the Inter-American Commission at the time? They said, sorry, we're in election mode. We can't do anything. And I was like, excuse me, but if Russia were to invade our territory and start a war, would you sit back and say, no, I'm sorry, I can't address this. I'm in election mode. No, genocide's a national crisis. And then of course, oh, but the big issue is pipelines. Oh, and now the issue is the pandemic. Literally everything comes before the well-being of Indigenous women and girls. So I just think it's really important that people understand that Canada hasn't just fallen down, hasn't failed, has made purposeful choices not to act. They've already been found guilty of historic and ongoing genocide, and you can't be found guilty of genocide unless you have the requisite intention. And all of the evidence shows Canada intended to commit these acts of genocide, and every day that they don't act on it, that's also intentional, and they need to be held to account for this inaction.
Wow, yeah, you're getting me riled up too. So I'm telling you, it's pretty crazy, and when I hear you speak on all this, I understand a little bit, and I think this way is that they're suppressing for a reason. They're suppressing for a reason because at the other side of it, like Art Manuel, the late Art Manuel, he said, for decades, our elders and our people have been fighting for our rights. And that he goes, right now, that door of opportunity is open now. Take advantage of it before it closes and never opens again. But that's what they're afraid of too, is that when like you get educated and work on this, like I'm really proud of this next generation coming up. Like people my kids' age, they're just badass, and they're gonna do a lot of really great things, and that's what they're afraid of. It feels like. What's your thoughts on it?
Oh my gosh, that is the thing that they have been obsessively terrified about, that, we would start to look at ourselves in all the beauty and wonder and pride of our people and our cultures again, and let that be what fills us up and motivates us to go forward. They're terrified of that. Idle no more. We weren't violent. We weren't, terrorizing people. We didn't bring guns to the party. Idle no more showed Canada the thing they're most scared of. Not only are we still here, but we're still proud, despite all of the ways in which they have torn us down, and despite all of the ways in which we are still the walking wounded. We're maybe the walking wounded, but we're proud of who we are, and we will fight to the death to protect our territories and our people and all of the living things here. And that terrified them. And you know how we know that? Because of all the access to information requests that we made to the RCMP, to the Department of National Defense, to CSIS, to Indian Affairs, and to others, to look at what are the things that they're concerned about. I made my own access to information request, and I got thousands of documents, lots of them redacted from different organizations. But if you look at all of the ways in which Indian Affairs monitored just what I was doing, for example, they were scared of two primary things. The first one was that First Nations would start to believe that they're sovereign again. So every time I talk, I try to remind people, yes, we are still sovereign. It may have been interfered with. There may be challenges ahead of us, but nothing ever extinguished or eliminated our sovereignty. So long as there's one of us breathing on this territory, this is sovereign native territory. And they were terrified of that. So there's lots of emails going back and forth. Oh my gosh, all these First Nations leaders are going to start thinking that they're independent. And then the other thing that they were terrified about, now keep in mind, this was during, 2012, 2013, was that I was going around telling people that Canada was guilty of genocide. and all the ways in which Canada was guilty of genocide. Because you've got two things going on here. One, when people are, proud of who they are and they're resisting things like genocide, that can be very motivational because you're very protective of your people and all of those other things. And then when you couple that with, and we're sovereign and we have the power to do this and we have the power to take back our people and our culture, that's a very powerful force. So then you had the RCMP and you had some racist academics writing reports for the government saying, whoa, we've got a problem. We've got a young cohort of Indigenous peoples, which they described as a cohort of mostly youthful people, pride of their culture, knowledgeable about the fact that these are their lands, ready to defend their lands in terms of, land defenders, water protectors, and all of these things. And they said the worst thing that could possibly happen is if all of these people coalesce and get together and become a united force. And I was like, thank you. You just wrote the book on what our resistance is going to be. And so, if they're terrified, that there's something to it. And I think part of the problem is that so many times we don't even believe we have the power. It seems monumental. It seems overwhelming. You've got the federal government, all the provincial governments, they have all the money, they have all the police officers with their guns and everything else. But look at the difference our people make. And one person, one hummingbird can make a difference and can stop billion-dollar industries. And we just need to believe in that again. And no, that doesn't happen overnight. How long have we been fighting Trans Mountain? Forever. But the hummingbird showed up and said, okay, you have our back, we'll have your back right now. And it's the same all across the country. It could be the southern residents, killer whales. It could be birds. It could be the wetlands. It could be anything else. So long as we are always acting from our cultures where we're protecting all of those living things, they will always have our back. And I truly believe that. And I just think we need to remember how much power is in that. Like I look at, political organizations and all of that stuff, and they all perform different things, but the most progress we've ever made has come from individuals taking on Canada. It will be those 3 elderly ladies out in Wolastoqey territory who said, you know what, we're going to try and stop this mine, these grandmothers, and no one paid any attention. And then it did start to pay attention. Then people started to join them. And then now it's a thing. And now the government has to deal with it. And it's the same across the country. I look at Cindy Blackstock and what she has done for First Nations kids in foster care. And she just refuses to give up. She refuses to make deals. There is no deal to be made on First Nation kids in foster care. Or Cher McIver from Lower Nicola Band. She sued Canada over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until she won. And now she's still at the United Nations saying, yeah, but what you did was not good enough for all of the women and children, so we're going to keep going. And you know what? I put my faith in individuals. There's far more power in that than in the political deal making. And that's what really inspires me. And I just wish everybody would see the incredible power that we have, and they wouldn't be scared if we weren't powerful.
That's right. That's right. One thing that we're looking at, and I think I talked a little bit about this about you, is, looks like we are going to the United Nations. We are going to do some filing there, but it would be good to go together, because November, Trudeau's going over. You remember he tried to get on the security committee and the nation said, you don't even listen to our recommendations. Why would we want you on there? So we want to be there. And I know that was on recommendations from the BC Indian chiefs that are working with some people up north. And I know the Mohawks would be interested in coming, and there's a couple in the plains that want to come, but this is something that we should team up on and go. We should for sure do that.
For sure. Because that's the other thing about, we have, since there has even been a such thing as the United Nations, our representatives from our sovereign nations have been going to both the United Nations and the Inter-American Commission, making submissions and saying, we are sovereign nations. This is what's happening in our territories. You need to hold Canada or the United States, Australia, or Aotearoa, New Zealand to account for all of these human rights abuses and failure to respect our rights. And we've been heard, and they continue to make recommendations forcing Canada's hand. they don't have an army to come in and you know, make Canada do anything. However, there's a significant amount of political pressure. And so you've got the political pressure on that end, but then you also have, every time they make a recommendation, then you've got courts in Canada who can say, you know what, we should take judicial notice of those recommendations and see if Canada is complying with its international human rights obligations, like UNDRIP, for example. I mean, UNDRIP is, we've been pleading UNDRIP since 2007, since it was passed. And so we need to keep doing that. And what I like most about it is, once we get there, whether it's in Geneva or Washington or wherever it is that we are, we've got Indigenous peoples from all over the world that come together and we strategize in camera. So we don't do it for the states or any of their, you know, bureaucrats to listen, but we strategize about who's going to do what and who's going to make what submissions so that we can maximize our submissions. And we already do that to some extent here in Canada. And what's great about it is most of these submissions come from like grassroots, as opposed to the big national organizations. You know, they have their usual speaking, whatever, but the actual powerful submissions come from the grassroots people who are organizing together. So, you know, whether it's the Tsleil-Waututh or Mi'kmaq people or Haudenosaunee people or Wet'suwet'en or Secwepemc, or all these different groups coming together. So sometimes it's joint submission, sometimes it's individual, but it's the strategy behind it. We are always working, even when people don't see it. And Canada hates that they don't know that, because we don't do the same political circles. We don't actually invite Canadian officials to sit down and hear our strategies, like what happens with some national Aboriginal organizations who invite every government official and every industry. There's no industry in our strategy sessions. And I think that's what makes us really powerful. They can't put a finger on what it is we're doing or what we're going to do next. Because the other thing that's really important is we don't go around making false threats to anything. We don't say, oh, if you don't do this, we're going to do this. We just say, okay, here's your opportunity to act in good faith. And if you don't, yeah, it might be quiet for a while, but then shit happens and they have no idea that it's coming, who it's coming from, or what kind of supports they have. And they really misjudge what happens on social media. And I think we just need to keep being very strategic about that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying really, I'm trying really hard to stay from our Indigenous political national. I won't go there. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
I'm trying not to. No, but yeah, that's what we want to do, and we for sure will talk about that with you. I know there's other nations, people like us, right in every province, that want to do something and move something forward, and coming together as a collective would be really good and really important and really powerful. And yeah, what are you working on right now?
Well, I just did a session with 4 chiefs from New Brunswick, 2 from the Mi'kmaq Nation and 2 from the Wolastoqey Nation, because the premier in New Brunswick, a conservative, Premier Higgs, of course, has been doing a lot of dog whistle, racist, hateful, divisive comments about First Nations. He lost a case against First Nations that they brought because the province kept making all of these decisions that were violating First Nation rights. They lost the case. And so they retaliated by saying, oh yeah, we're going to cancel your resource agreements. They just gave notice, no talking to any chiefs, no good faith table. They just reacted to that. And they didn't just cancel those agreements. They said, oh, by the way, these agreements would be unfair. What they do is they create super wealthy First Nations, and it's unfair to other businesses if First Nations have these agreements. So we know what that means. Unfair.
We had the same problem.
Racist. Yeah, exactly. It's racist terminology to say you don't deserve your native rights. We're not going to respect your native rights. And then the other side of things, that these super wealthy First Nations, we know that the vast majority of First Nations in the country are impoverished. Not all of them, but the vast majority. And those who are the most impoverished, get which side of the country they come from. Yeah, that would be the Atlantic region. So you're talking about some of the most impoverished First Nations in all of Canada. And you've got this premier saying, oh, they're super wealthy because they get resource agreements. Really? Show me all of the Mercedes Benz that they're driving around, all the mansions that they're living in. Show me their clean water. Show me all of these things that prove what you're saying. And of course they're not. It's just racist language. And so that was one of the things I was working on. The media wasn't giving enough time to First Nations. Obviously, they just kept perpetuating this racist narrative. So I had them on a panel to say, okay, what are all the issues here? What's happening? What do New Brunswickers need to know? And obviously still also working on what's happening with Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia with our fishing rights. And at the same time, we've also been working, trying to push the government to have some kind of plan to deal with genocide against Indigenous women and girls, but not as the controller of the plan. Why would you ask a state perpetrator of genocide to come up with a plan of how they're not going to do genocide anymore? That's like, asking the abuser to come up with a plan of, how they're going to treat the person they abuse all the time. I'm sorry, no. And that's not how it works in other countries. So what we've been making submissions to the Inter-American Commission and the United Nations saying we need independent international oversight to work with Indigenous women who will lead the way on what's going to happen with ending genocide in Canada. Of course, Canada's having nothing to do with it. So we're trying to pin them down on a whole bunch of issues in every forum. So what doesn't work on the political side, then there might be litigation over here. What doesn't work here, then there might be, demonstrations in the streets. And what doesn't work over here, we will hurt you in different areas. So for example, you already raised when Trudeau was just flying around the world trying to win this precious seat on the UN Security Council. And we said, oh, no, you're not, mister. You're not dealing with genocide. Well, we are going to make submissions to other countries. We are going to make submissions to the UN. We are going to be loud about it. We're going to write opt-eds. We're going to do we did all of these things, and we lobbied with other countries to say, do not give Canada that seat. You cannot be a state perpetrator of genocide and sit on the UN Security Council and purport to be about safety and human rights for the rest of the world. That would be counter to the whole purpose of the UN Security Council. And they lost that seat. And so we have to celebrate every single one of these victories, even if it only lasts for a day, even if a court decision gets turned over in a couple of months. We have to celebrate all of these victories because these victories are powerful. And it's only when we acknowledge them, if we stop Trans Mountain for 1 day, 1 week, if we stop, Coastal GasLink pipeline for 3 weeks because of wetlands, if we stop Doug Ford from destroying all of the wetlands on Mississaugas of Scugog territory here for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, all of these things are victories and their power because the energy, you've got powerful, positive, righteous energy. It feeds itself. And we need to do more of that feeding instead of, only looking at, look at the government's doing this and this and this, because we've survived genocide. We've outlasted them this long. We've survived every Minister of Indian Affairs, every Prime Minister. We can survive the next 100 because we were the first people here and we will be the last people here. And I think we just need to remember that there's a lot of difficulty in the middle, but it's always been our mission to be the caretakers. And so we got this, and we're just getting stronger every day.
That's right. One thing that I think of, and you just mentioned it, is the media. Like you look at Trudeau when he does his town hall meetings, and I really wanted to speak there, and I talked to a couple elders, and he said, he'll just make his best look unreasonable. I wanted to give it a shot anyway, but I ended up getting talked out of it. But I look at what the things that he will say. It's for jobs. We've proven that. We've proven it. On the economy, we've proven that. They're basing their analysis on $80 a barrel. They never changed once. We did multiple economic studies. We did the spill analysis. Even when we went to court, they said the discrepancy between the spill analysis is quite a big difference. Looks like to Tsleil-Waututh, you're right, but we're still going to side of the best interests of Canada. 3 handpicked judges of the Federal Court of Appeal, handpicked by Trudeau. Of course, they're going to do things like that. But when it goes back to the media, they say, yeah, they won. Okay, it's good. Or Trudeau saying, yeah, he said it's for jobs. Oh, it must be for jobs. Then the people think that. The people think that. They pull the wool right over their eyes and look out your window. look at the weather change. Look at everything's changing. Look at 80% of the mammals have died since I've been born. 50% of the world's species have died. Figure these things out, and we're next. We're next. You know, I think people see an environmentalist fighting for Earth. No, it's just going to be okay. It's us. It's humanity. We're screwed.
Yeah.
We're really screwed. But the media and industry portray these things this way. And I had faith in Canada 10 years ago. And yeah, no, they're going to figure it out. But it got worse after Trump. It got worse.
Oh.
Trudeau took a page out of his book and said, hey, I'm going to do that. Just regurgitate the same things over and over and over again. And then pretty soon they're listening. And that's what the media plays. It's crazy.
It is. And that's what happens when a country or a territory is governed by politics and not by leadership that's based on core values. And I'm not talking about liberal, conservative, NDP, the marijuana party, any of those things. I'm talking about core values, human life, the life of all of our living relationships, and the life of the planet. And if you cannot govern a territory where that comes first every single time, then you don't know how to be a leader. You don't know how to be a leader. If you can't save lives, you don't know how to be a leader, and you need to move over. And you see that now. People worry about politics. So Trudeau's like, oh, well, what will get me elected? You know, what will get me some of those conservative voters? What will get me this? The best leader in the world is the one that is voted out in the next election. And you know why? Because they had the backbone to make some hard decisions around how to save our people and the planet, protect human rights, you know, protect all of these things, you know, protect families, protect children, all of the things that matter in our community, what keeps the human race going, what keeps living things going. And so you can judge a leader by the kinds of decisions they make. And when you're always trying to play to your voting base, this is why we're in the mess we are with COVID, right? You've got, like in my province, you've got, you know, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who cares only about his corporate buddies and his, you know, construction contractors and all of those guys, and has not acted as though he's cared for the lives of Ontarians, you know, leaving schools open, restaurants open, gyms open, when we've had like astronomical COVID rates and giving mixed messages. And so now we have kids dying. We have over 1,000 kids who have contracted COVID. And, you know, we've had 8 that have died. So the ages are getting younger and younger. So what does a politician do? A politician says, well, it's these corporations that fund my election. And it's all these yahoos, like these fringe right wingers who support me. So I think I'm just going to do that. What does a leader do? A leader says, I don't give 2 craps if I get elected next. My priority is I'm shutting down this province, and I am not going to let a single child die, not a man, woman, or child die from this. And we will do whatever it takes to provide every support needed. And instead of tell Justin Trudeau, when Justin Trudeau says, we're going to send in the Red Cross, we're going to send in the army. And Doug Ford says, no, that's okay. We're not going to do that unless you barter and give some more vaccines over on this side. Dude, you have 1 million vaccines sitting in freezers, not getting out to people. So you can't barter with our lives like that. And that's the problem. You see this all across the country where people are politicking and not leading, which is so different from the way we governed our territories, which was about first and foremost, you know, protecting all of the living things in our territory. And I think, boy, you know, we're in some trouble, but I think here's the positive side of things, that we not only have Canadians' ear on Indigenous issues, we have Canadians' ears on things that matter, like health, safety, well-being, protecting the planet. You want to go and see those birds? You want to be bird watchers? You want to hope that they live in the future. And that means you have to take steps to protect it. So we are also teaching Canadians and all of the settlers on this territory how to be responsible, because the most irresponsible thing they could do is vote every 4 years. I mean, they've been taught in schools and in government that to be a responsible citizen, you vote every 4 years. That's the most irresponsible thing you could do. because that means you just vote and you sit back and you stop being the government that you are. These people aren't the government. It's the people that are the government, not these people who are elected. And if we sit back and let them make all these disastrous mistakes, that's irresponsible on our part. And you see more and more Canadians, more and more organizations, more and more groups, anti-poverty groups, environmental groups, you know, homelessness groups, like unions and others coming together and saying, you know what, these governments aren't taking care of us either. So what do we have to lose by actually coming together and protecting all of living things here on this territory, including human beings?
Yeah, it's crazy. You know, even sorts of, we could go on and on and on. We're gonna go to some questions in a minute, but even in elementary school, it starts where they, it's been proven that studies that when First Nations kids start learning history, their grades go down. It's degrading. It's much more than that. My own doctor, she said, I was talking about metabolic typing and DNA testing, and she goes, "Oh, I get it because you're hunter and gatherer." And I went, "Okay, you know what? It's much more than that, and I'm going to tell you what's up." but it's crazy because my daughter went to private school. She's from Tulalip tribes in the States, and she's super smart, so they sent her a good school, and she graduated at 15 with 32 kids, and every single one of those 32 kids all graduated at 15, and they teach them different. In public schools, they could say, "Hey, you're really smart. You could be a doctor or lawyer." Every single one of those 32 kids, every single one took political science or business. Be in politics or be rich like your parents. And it's a big difference, but it starts there where people lose their idea of what American dream is or Canadian dream or projecting yourself forward or wanting to be a leader. And they start telling us what to think, what to do, what to feel. And you're right, it's not just Indigenous communities. It's everybody now. We're all affected. The unions are affected, homelessness, all those things. They keep putting a Band-Aid on these things. They give $2 million to the homeless here in Vancouver. It doesn't improve, and we need the visionaries to improve and not being told what the government on how to deal with things, because it's not. Because what they're really dealing with and what they continue to deal with is creating the have and have-nots. And it's affecting not just Indigenous people now, it's everybody. We're all screwed and we all need to do something about it. But let's go to some questions. I'm really thankful for everything that you're saying, but that's just a part of it, is what you're touching on. Like when we're off camera, I just want to say this to the people that are watching live stream. Like we laugh and we joke and we have fun before and after, but we talk way more than what this is. This is just sort of the tip of the iceberg, but it's we're just like sort of dorks because this is all we do.
And some stuff we can't, we can't talk about publicly. Like, I know for anything that's live stream, I try to say as much as I possibly can, but save all the strategy, like the, detailed strategy for just us, because I don't want to empower, government officials or CSIS, high CSIS, or anybody else who's watching.
Yeah, and I must say too, this, when Canada knows, here in BC, we have a lot of really good allies. Just before COVID hit, I called a meeting, and I think it was Peter was like 2 or 3 days notice. We sent it out to 50 organizations, and I think Charlene, like 40 showed up, and 90 people, and wow. and they're there, and not just from BC, Washington State. They came up about 20 of them or something. So
that's awesome.
We do have a lot of really good allies because they see it too. They see the truth. It's not just us, it's everybody. And we need to, if it's that way, that let's move forward and create something better for our own future. So Christine or Peter, is there questions?
Yeah, there's a question here by Kalik in our Zoom chat. He wrote, the exhaustive, painful treatment to First Nations has been generational. What are some tried and true things that can give us some strength legally, politically, and culturally today?
That's a really awesome question because, we talk about this stuff all the time, and it's important to acknowledge that we haven't survived genocide without casualties, both living and those who are now our ancestors. We've suffered a significant amount of casualties, and the people who are living today many have multiple overlapping traumas and, issues to deal with. So it's not like, everything is, bright and sunny and, let's just forge ahead. It's about how is it that we continue the fight for all of those who can't fight right now, who maybe can join the fight later, or who maybe have to make sure that they're raising their kids, because, there's nothing more important to our nations than raising healthy, safe children. I think that is the most warrior thing we can do in our nations, because it guarantees we have a future generation of people who are loved and they love themselves and they're grounded in their culture. And so all of that, I think we just need to remember that, as hard as it is, and I know it's hard, we have to be the safe place to fall for our people, even the ones who are expressing their trauma in harmful ways, even the ones who are angry and who are name calling and who are lashing out and who are screaming. This is trauma speaking. And we have to remember to take our people where they're at. It's great for us to talk about decolonization. Not everybody even knows what decolonization is. I mean, there's lots of academic terms and jargon and theories and all of this other stuff. We have to take our people where they are. And some people can be part of this right now and some can't. And some, for our own personal safety, can't be part of this. And that's also a part of it too. Also making sure that we're navigating all of this trauma to make sure that while you're working on yourself, we have to keep us safe from the ways in which you're expressing your trauma, because that's not safe for us. And so it's complex and it's personal. And we're talking about our brothers and our sisters and our husbands and our wives or our ex-boyfriends or the sister down the street or the cousin up the road that we don't like. And, it's very complicated. And so we just have to remember that most of this is trauma speaking, that we have to take people where they are and understand that we're going to have to carry this burden for a while. But that burden is an honor. It's an honor. It's an honor that our ancestors gave us, because our ancestors made sure that we would be here to carry this burden for now, while the people who are here can't do it right now because of their trauma. And I think it's important to remember that that's an honor. And then what I've already said is we have to remember to celebrate every single victory. So yes, here's all the things that are happening right now. Here's all the struggles that we're having. Here's all of our strategies. But don't forget, this week, the hummingbirds stopped Trans Mountain. Let's celebrate that. Let's have a feast around that. Let's have some tears around that. Let's have some joy around that. Let's do some beading around that. Let's make a ribbon skirt that's just full of hummingbirds. I mean, there's so many ways we can express our gratitude to the hummingbird, to all of those victories. And I think the more we do that, the more we will attract and inspire people, because we're also having this conversation with people who are disconnected from our communities. Keep in mind the impact of residential schools, human trafficking, 60 Scoop, foster care have just taken thousands of children out of our communities who don't know the people in their communities, don't have a relationship, maybe feel awkward about trying to reach out, maybe try to reach out and they get rejected, because they're not real Indians. And so there's a lot of the colonial impacts that are here. And so I think we have to also be talking to them and say, listen, we are doing everything we can to bring you home. Our sole mission in life is to bring all of our people home. Living or spiritual wise, we need to bring them home. And, let them know that their ancestors are here working with us all the time, and that the ancestors are sitting beside them, even if they don't hear them yet, even if they don't know how to listen yet, and just to hold on one more day. If you're sitting in youth corrections or in prison or in foster care, or you're living on the street, we just need you to hold on one more day, because every day that you survive, that's evidence that we still have warriors, that our nations still have a future. And I think we just need to keep reminding everybody that we need every single person to make this a success. And that's why bringing our people home is it's got to be our number one priority, honest to goodness, and to let them know that there is something worth living for despite the trauma surrounded in, that even if we can't see the path that it'll get better in the future, just to have that faith to know they said they were going to bring me home. Okay, that's enough to get me through until tomorrow. And then tomorrow, that'll be enough to get me through until the next day. And I think if we can help inspire our kids to know that we are coming for them and we will be bringing them home, and everybody who's been disconnected, then Canada will be no match for us. I mean, Canada will be small potatoes.
Yeah, I hear you. I totally hear you. To Tsleil-Waututh, I'm pretty proud that everyone who applied came home. Our population doubled when they reversed Bill C-31, and it's always been that way. And it's funny when it's not funny, but it's the truth when you talk that way. But I believe in the same thing. I still volunteer downtown East Side. My brother's down there, and I help with the homeless, and I volunteer in a men's treatment program. And even when we're in business, my brother and I, we talk about it, and when we have potential partners, we say those things. We say this is the history of what Canada did to First Nations, and then we say these horrible things happen, and we say we lived through it. And right then and there, we determine whether they'll be our business partner or not. Because if there's empathy and understanding, then okay. If not, we don't need to work with you. We're going in the direction of creating healthy lives and healthy people. And whatever it might be, with the fundamentals of our spirit, with our teachings of truth, family, health, and culture, or whatever it might be, with the foundation of what we believe we are. And it's different. It's different from everything else. You're right. We have to remember, we have to pick up our people. We have to help the women. Look at the men in corrections. Look at we're 40% homeless and 6% Canada's population. That's a direct reflection of genocide residential school. My mom, she's one of very, very few elders that could speak and talk about the death and murders that she witnessed of 5-year-old children. She could talk about it. Not many elders can talk about it, let alone the other abuse that they've been through. But what I'm proud of her is, we were a poor family, and all our nephews and nieces are spiritual. All of them follow our ceremonial ways, every single one of them. And I'm really proud of them. They participate and they help and they run some of the ceremonies. And that's the freedom. That's coming back. And that's what you're saying is bring them home. Yes, let's bring them home. Bring them home, give them hope. My grandfather would do that. And the height of his fame, his manager called and said, "What are you doing today?" He goes, "I'm taking my boys to the dentist." He goes, "Oh, do you want a limo?" And the little kids are going, yeah. And he goes, "No, I'm taking the bus." And we're on the bus and people are going, "Is that Chief Don George?" But he got off way before our dentist, and he'd walk through downtown and he'd talk to the people, and the homeless people, and he'd give to them. He'd give so much. And I remember looking at him, I was like, "Grandpa, they might just spend it on drugs. Like, what are you doing?" And he just looked at me and he smiled. And what I realized and what I remembered after, he's given part of himself. And that's what we do. That's what we have to do is because those are the people that are suffering, that are in jail, and the people that you're talking about, they're mothers and fathers and nephews and nieces and sons and daughters of people who love them. And so, yeah, I 100% agree. Thank you for that. Questions anymore, Christine?
There's another question in the chat here from Daryl, and it's, how should NGOs work with our peoples? Do you have any advice for them?
Oh, that's another really good question. And it's actually one that I get all the time. I'm glad that question's being asked because non-government organizations, NGOs, and other smaller community groups and grassroots organizations, they are so important to advancing the issue of human rights, protecting the planet, protecting the lands, protecting the waters. They do a lot of really good work. You see a lot of really passionate people there who give their life, who say, you see lawyers who could be working on Bay Street making millions, but they're like, I'm going to take this tiny salary, but because I want to save the rainforest, or I want to save this river. And so you've got a lot of people who are very passionate about what they're doing and they care very deeply. So you think about the core values that align, and I think that's important. I think we've learned a lot over the years. I hope NGOs and other allies have learned a lot over the years. Historically, NGOs and other allies would speak for us, over us, on top of us. They would be the ones that decided that they knew what was right for the collective we, and they would go ahead with that, and really didn't know how to work in partnership with Indigenous peoples and let Indigenous peoples lead on Indigenous issues. And that's, and that's characteristic of relationships. Think about in any family, you have all different kinds of relationships in your family, and you have to keep working on it. You have to keep working on, the ones you don't like and the ones you do like. And, when there's problematic relationships, and sometimes spending some time apart when it doesn't work for you and it doesn't work for your spirit. Other times working to try to heal relationships. And it's the same with NGOs and allies. We've done a lot of that kind of relationship building over the years, and there's still problems. But I think my most important advice would be on anything Indigenous, anything that even remotely is Indigenous, and hint, hint, everything's Indigenous. You must always approach the relationship from a position of respect and support, not one of the savior, but one as a supporter. And those things are two very different things. And I'll give you a prime example. So in the past, I would have organizations say, Pam, we want to do a submission to the UN and we would like to include an Indigenous voice. Can you write a paragraph for our submission? And then they would go to the UN and do all the speaking. Yeah, that's not really cool. Now compare a different organization who said, Pam, we think it's important that there be an Indigenous voice on, the harm that transnational corporations do, like the extractive industry. Can we pay your way there? Can we help provide you the research and the drafting of the kinds of things that you want to say? And can you speak on this issue? And all of the other issues that they want to raise, not just Indigenous. And so they lifted my voice. They supported me to be there. They helped me make the submission. And so that's how you work with Indigenous peoples. You don't only call them on Indigenous issues, and I think it's that making sure to make space for people where we've been traditionally excluded, not just doing the token part of things. And, there are some problematic NGOs, I'm not going to point any of them out, but who purport now to be the ones to speak. So they're the ones that you talk to on, let's just say, incarceration rates. And nobody else, only they get to speak, and they're the determinative, they're the experts. And I think we have to be careful of any organization that purports to be the governing body or the only one to speak on these things, because the vast majority of experts are on the ground in the communities. Like if I was to become a billionaire overnight, the last thing I would do really is fund any national organization. I would say, all these people, running shelters, native shelters, all these people, here's a blast of money. Here's everything you need to do, because they're already doing it. Look at the places, the people on the ground who are already doing the important work, and help support them. So I think we need to work together. I think it's important to be allies and be strong, and that's really powerful. Just there's going to be times when we're going to have to say to some NGOs, this isn't working for us right now. So we're just going to take a bit of a break. For other ones, it's like, let's keep working on this relationship because we have some bumps, but that's what every relationship's about, and we'll work through it. It's just really about being brave enough to have those conversations. And, any NGO or community organization I work with, I just put that all on the table. I say, when something's not working, I'm going to tell you, because there's no point in having it become a thing. And we can either work it out like a family, or we can get a divorce. It's up to you.
Yeah, I know. I would say that. I said, you know what? I don't fight my allies. My fight's with Trans Mountain. That's a
Yeah.
big fight as it is.
Yeah.
But you know, Rex Weiler was founder of Greenpeace. He's our guest last week. He has a long history of working with the George family, Tislewatit, and he's reflecting on when we first started working with the NGOs. There's about 20 people and a couple of different NGOs, and actually Peter's organization was one of them. And they came and they said, well, we need your help. And they said, well, if you want our help, we'll do it. First Nations will lead it. And then they said, we'll show you why. Let us show you why. So they came to ceremony. It was for a year that they came to ceremony. And the elders said, come to ceremony. But it was 3 months straight that we didn't talk about anything. We just did ceremony. And what it is a built community, but also showed them why. It's like a simple thing. You lighten a smudge. There's every ceremony I've been to around the world. It's the same thing: fire, earth, water, and sky in their ceremony. So when they light a smudge with the fire and it's earth, smoke comes out of it. But what that represents is a spirit. But those are the elements that we're using to help us to introduce us to spirit. And that's what the elders wanted to show them. Hey, this is spirit. So of those 40 that showed up in that last meeting, I think all of them came to at one time or another to a ceremony hosted by us. And I think that's important in building community, but showing them why we protect what we love. Do we have time for another question, Peter or Christine?
Yeah, I have one more question. There's a lot of beautiful comments here in our Zoom group about how awesome of a speaker you are, Pam, and a lot of feelings of empowerment. And I see behind you, there's that book you wrote called Warrior Life. Could you tell us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because these two books kind of go hand in hand. This book, Indigenous Nationhood, that was written during the Harper era. And my publisher said, well, you need to do a collection of your writings from the Trudeau era and kind of do like a comparison. So I used basically the same categories, pulled a whole bunch of writings together, did some new ones to just look at what's the similarities and what's the differences. And the reason why this first book was so important is because it's a collection of writings when I first really started exercising my voice in a very public way. So in my blogs. And, you know, before I was in the media, I was saying, hey, the AFN's doing this. I don't like this. And here's why. Or here's this law. They're trying to pass it. And I think it's bad because my experience as a lawyer working at Justice Canada, blah, 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 blah. And exercising our voice is really powerful. And I wanted people to understand that even though people might be angry at you, even though people might call you names, even though people might, you know, hate you, your voice is still important. Excuse me.
Yeah, no worries. Take your time.
Let me go get a cough drop.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. Go ahead. Well, thanks everybody for joining in. We're with Pam Palmater, and she's a lawyer and a doctor, and she has her doctorate and powerful, beautiful speaker. And we're just winding up our show here. We've been gave an update on the Trans Mountain, and we talked through this whole episode of how the hummingbirds, powerful hummingbirds, have stopped the pipeline construction for, was it 5 months, Peter? Oh, there she is.
4 months, yeah.
4 months, perfect.
Yeah, sorry, I've had a cold for like 4 weeks now. Anyway, and then I transitioned from like the focus on exercising our voice to, you know, here's exercising your voice, helping to provide information and education to our people. So what's the next step? It's education for action. So Warrior Life is about really celebrating people who put all of that into action. You know, our land defenders, our water protectors, our human rights advocates, you know, people who are constantly taking concrete action. And I really think that those two things have to be married together, that even this YouTube or Facebook Live, I hope that people who are watching on the live understand that if you know better, if you've got the information, if you've been educated on something, the next step is you have to do something about it. Not everyone's going to do the same thing. Not everyone is a land defender. Not everyone's a water protector. Not everyone's a lawyer in court. Not everyone's a human rights activist. Not everybody speaks in the media. Not everyone's a professor. Not everyone is an elder. You know, not everyone is a beater or can make ribbon skirts, but we all have something we can contribute at different times in different places. So I would never expect a single mom with, 5 kids struggling to, keep her family together and keep everyone safe to be the one to organize all of the strategies. But by her raising healthy, safe children, she's already doing a warrior job. So what could someone else do to help support her in her warrior job? Just kind of like land defenders. You don't have to be the one on the ground, but are you contributing? Are you helping to organize? Are you sharing it on social media? Are you helping to fundraise for court costs? Like, there's always something that people can do, allies and Indigenous peoples. And I think we just have to figure it out. What is it that you have to offer? Are you a researcher? Are you in IT? Can you help facilitate these events? Can you draft websites? Are you a really great writer? Are you awesome in the media? We all have our own individual skills. And I think we just need to figure out what those are and how we can contribute and contribute forever. So this isn't a one-time thing. It's not a one-time show. It's not a one-time like our life is now forever. So it's kind of like, healthy eating. It's not just a diet for a week, it's forever. And so is advocacy. And so is protecting the planet. It's forever. So what is your forever job? Helping.
So tell us, where could we have about 2 minutes left. Where could people see you? Tell us about your show, or where could people watch?
Okay, well,
also, before you get to that, type it in here so we can put it up on Sacred Ecology as well.
Oh yeah, okay. It's very easy. So there's a bunch of ways that you can get me. Here's my website, pampalmater.com. And on my website, you can access how to buy my books, for example. You can access my Warrior Life podcast that Ruben's been on. And that's a podcast where we try to uplift the grassroots warriors and advocates and other people really making a change for Indigenous peoples. You can access through my website, the Warrior Kids podcast. So all of you have kids, we're starting young. We're teaching these, Native warriors and allies young about what it means, celebrating everything Indigenous, first of all, how cool we all are in our cultures, but also caring about things like the environment and animals and what we can do about that. I also have a blog. It's called Indigenous Nationhood. It's the same name as my book here, where you can get all of my blogs. I have a section on all of my publications. So everything I write for Maclean's and Chatelaine and Globe and Mail and CBC and APTN, like everywhere I publish, I post it all on there. And there are also links to my Facebook, my Instagram, my LinkedIn, and most recently, I was dragged kicking and screaming to join TikTok. And so now I'm on TikTok, and I said I could never go on TikTok because they're singing and dancing, and what do I know about dancing? Well, my dancing consists of the chest up. So, I mean, that's about the extent of the dancing you're going to get, but I'm trying to educate a younger generation through humor, through songs, celebrating our culture, and also dealing with some hard stuff in politics. And what's great about TikTok is that you don't have to be a content creator. You can just sign up with a user 123 name and just watch all of the TikToks. And one thing I find really unique about TikTok is native TikTok. So Native people from all over Canada and the US, we're all connected. We all, for the most part, we all support one another. And then you can connect out to, the Maori in Aotearoa or sovereign Hawaii or Native people in Australia. And that's like really awesome. People kicking ass and taking names and showing off their culture and having their views expressed. And younger people are watching this and they're learning. And it's fabulous. So, pardon the dancing, but other than that, there's some really positive messages, I think, on TikTok. So those are all the different places you can get me. Oh, and my YouTube. Yes, I have a YouTube channel, but you can access it through the website too.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let Christine sign us out because our time's up, and she probably has about 20 seconds to do that.
Okay.
And so just hold on one sec.